Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Retro Game Superleagues. I'm Brian, also known as UKGN Zoidberg, and this is the series where I get to rank all Amiga games in a specific category. This is one that I've been working on for a good 2 months now. I was trying to get this one out this week as the Euros are currently in full swing. This is where I'm going to rank 58 football games on the Amiga. Now, I'm not including football management games in this one, as there are probably just as many of those, and they'll get their own list at some point later on in the year. There are a number of games on this list that are known by different titles in various different countries, so I'm going to be talking about them based on the title that they were released under in the UK. Got a couple of hyperactive cats running around behind me while I'm doing this, so if I get disturbed, that's why. As always, the games that I talk about in this episode are going to be ranked in one of the 5 categories that are on screen now: essential, recommended, good, poor, or rubbish. So as there's so many games for me to be talking about, let's just get on with it. First game we have is 3D World Soccer, which came out in 1992 from Similmondo, and it's a technically very impressive game with a nice combination of scaling sprites and 3D. Unfortunately, it's let down by some really slow gameplay and the fact that it's really difficult, or at least I found it to be. The switching of the player under your control doesn't happen quick enough for my liking, and that made it really frustrating to play, but I think the technical side of it means that I'm going to kick things off by putting this one in the good category. Next up, we have Adidas Championship Football, which came out in 1990, published by Ocean Software and from a developer called Wicked Software. This is a really bad Kickoff clone that's just really slow and frustrating to play. Never once did I actually feel like I was actually controlling what was going on in the pitch. And I did actually play this one on the Spectrum, and the Spectrum version was much better, so this one is going to go in the poor category. Next up, we have Amiga Soccer, which came out in 1988 from Microdeal, and this plays like a 16-bit update of the Spectrum Classic Match Day, although it's not as good as that one in my opinion. Players seem to just casually stroll around the pitch with no sense of urgency. It's got no sound effects whatsoever, just an admittedly very jolly piece of music that's playing while you play. It's not really one that's worth playing though, so I think I am going to put this one in the poor category as well, but I think I would put this one above at Adidas Championship. Next up, we have Emlyn Hughes International Soccer, which was released in 1989 by Audiogenic, and this is better than your average port from the Commodore 64, but still not quite as good as the C64 version. It plays a really entertaining game of football though, especially for 2 players. It's got lots of options to personalise the teams, tournaments and playstyles, which means that it's got a little bit of longevity to it as well. If you don't know who Emlyn Hughes was, then just ask your dad. This one's going to go in the good category as well, and I think I'm going to put this one above 3D World Soccer. Next up, we have Empire Soccer 94, which came out in 1994, developed by Graphcold and published by Empire, strangely enough. There's no other words that I can use to describe this one, other than the ones that Amiga Power came up with, because it's probably the definitive description for this game, and that's that they called it Speedball with shorts. It looks great with some excellent player animation, and it plays fast and fluid and offers a decent challenge for the solo player. To put it in footballing terms, this is easily a top 4 contender, but doesn't quite have the cutting edge for the title, so I think I'm going to put this one in the essential category. Next up, we have England Championship Special, released in 1991, published by Grand Slam and developed by Tiermaker. This has got some really good full-screen presentation, but the lack of any crowd noise during gameplay really makes it pretty boring to play. I'm not sure whether I should consider the fact that the game had a practice penalties option in the options to be funny or not, as when this game was released, the idea of England losing in penalties was still pretty raw after the loss in Italia 90. I didn't really enjoy playing this game at all, and this one's going to go in the poor category as well, and I think I'm going to put it below Adidas Championship. Next up, we have Euro Championship 92, which was published by Elite Systems in 1992. It's got a really nice cartoon intro that the game simply doesn't live up to. The game itself has some really horrible graphics that makes it hard to see anything that's going on the pitch, and it's so bad that the goalkeepers' green jerseys actually blend into the grass, which is not good at all. the arcade gameplay is also far too basic for long-term play, and it's far too easy to score a goal. That makes multiplayer absolutely pointless as well. So this one's going to go in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Adidas Championship. Next up, we have European Champions from 1993. This was published by Ocean Software, but actually developed by Audiogenic, and it's actually the sequel to Emlyn Hughes International Soccer. It allows you to choose between side-on or overhead view at any time during the match, which is a nice touch. And it had a really innovative control method, which you really had to work at, which you really had to learn to get the most out of it. And and to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't bother reading the manual, as the manual just confuses you even more. Just stick with learning the game. You'll get to grips with it eventually. This one is actually going to go in the good category, and I'll explain why later. But I'm going to put this one above Emlyn Hughes. Next up, we have European Football Champ, which is a conversion of the hit Taito arcade game, and it actually plays a lot better than it looks, I must admit. A lot of the problems, though, do come from the arcade original. I like the way that it zooms in on various actions, such as goal celebrations or fouls, but it's a shame that it looks so pixelated when it does. Because it's an arcade game, though, the gameplay is very shallow and not very difficult. But I don't think it's bad enough to go in the poor category, so I'm going to stick this one in good, but I'm going to put it below 3D World Soccer. Next up, we have European Soccer Challenge. Came out in 1990 from Software Sorcery, published by Smash 16. And this is a pretty terrible game, to be honest. It reminded me very much of a game of under fives football, where a gaggle of players just run around wherever the ball goes, and because that's what the players do in this one. Ultimately, though, the game is far too sluggish and easy to be anywhere near enjoyable, and I think this is going to be the first game that goes in the rubbish category. And next up, we have Euro Soccer, which was published by Flare and developed by Creative Edge in 1992. It's incredibly rough around the edges, with action that speeds up and slows down seemingly at random. The players will regularly stand still and watch the ball going past them, which is especially bad when that's the goalkeeper. Considering how good a lot of other games looked in 1992, the graphics on this one are pretty much unforgivable. And I think I am going to put this one in the rubbish category as well, but I'm going to put it above European Soccer Challenge. Next up, we have FIFA International Soccer, the Amiga version of the Mega Drive smash hit. I was never really a fan of this game on the consoles, though, but even I can see that the Mega Drive version is better than this one. The developer, Visual Sciences, actually did a pretty decent conversion. What frustrates me about the game is that the things that your player does seems to bear no relation to the control inputs that you're making. Probably the most entertaining thing that you can do in the game is still running away from the referee, in my opinion. I can see why people enjoy this one, but it just wasn't for me. And I am going to put this one in the good category, and I think I'm going to put it below Emlyn Hughes. Next up, we have Fighting Soccer, which came out in 1989, published by Activision, developed by Software Studios, and this is a conversion of an SNK arcade machine, but the arcade machine was never that good in the first place. It's got ludicrously oversized characters that make it so that you can barely see anything on the pitch. When you do eventually get the ball yourself, you only ever seem to be able to kick it about 3 feet in front of you. It's frankly terrible. So this one is also going to go down in the rubbish category, and I'm going to put it between the two games that are in there already. Next, we come to Five-A-Side Soccer, which was released in 1998 from Crow Team, the developers of Serious Sam. This is a really enjoyable arcade kickabout, which offers something a little bit different to all the other games on this list by being indoor football. 5v5 indoor football is a lot of fun, and I love being able to bounce the ball off the walls. The smaller number of players and the use of sim bins make the game feel fresh, and it's got a good selection of indoor pitch types that you can play on, and a large selection of teams. So this one is going to go at the bottom of the essential category, below Empire Soccer, I think. And next up, we have Football Glory, which came out in 1994. Same developer as Five-A-Side, but this one was published by Black Legend. And this is basically the same game as Five-A-Side Soccer. It's just it's more traditional football with 11 aside. It's as close to a blatant copy of Sensible Soccer as you're likely to get, and that actually works against the game ultimately. Think of it as a sillier, more exaggerated version, and you'll still have fun with it though. The banana shots in this one are so ridiculous that you can score some truly astonishing goals, and the replays that come up on screen are fantastic. I think I'd prefer five-a-side football to this one though, so I'm going to put this one in the recommended category. Next up, we have Gary Lineker's Hot Shot, which came out in 1990, developed and published by Gremlin Graphics. And this is a really poor and basic game that looks like it's stuck in the 8-bit era, and that's probably because it probably is. You can't even tell where the player that you are actually controlling is most of the time. It doesn't even update the team colours. Whenever you play as a different team, you have to do that manually, which is just lazy development. This one is going to go in the rubbish category as well. And I think I'm going to put this one above the 3 games that are in there already. Next up, we have Gazza's Super Soccer though, which was released in 1989, and this was released just as the world was starting to hear of Paul Gascoigne, before everything that happened in Italia 90. It's got one of the most repetitive voice samples ever, encouraging you to have a shot whenever you get close enough to the goal, although obviously not in that tone of voice. The switching views from side on to the front of goal is a nice idea, but it's implemented really badly. It's got woeful unresponsive controls, and the player selection ruins it almost completely. But because of the interesting ideas that it had, I'm going to stick it at the bottom of the poor category, just above the rubbish. And that's because the next game is Gazza 2, released in 1991, after Italia 90. When Gazza's fame was at its peak. This is the only overhead view football game that I can think of where the action flows sideways, so that's something that it has going for it, I suppose. The ball sticks to your feet, so it's really easy to just run through the opposition rather than try to pass it. Is it an improvement on the first Gazza game? I don't think it is, to be honest, because the graphics are even worse, and I'm going to put this one at the top of the rubbish category, above Gary Lineker. Next up, we have Goal, which was released in 1993, developed by Dino Dini and published by Virgin Interactive. Despite what you're going to see coming up later on, this is a game that when we first previewed it in Amiga Action, we previewed it as Kickoff 3, because this is Kickoff 3 in all but name. The original creator, Dino Dini, refined and improved everything from his previous 2 games. The idea that player momentum affects things, and being able to control the ball by holding down the fire button, really added to the gameplay. I found this one to be fast, smooth and enjoyable, with a ton of options to help you get better. And I am going to stick this one in the essential category, but I'm going to put it above five-a-side soccer. Next up, we have Graham Souness Vector Soccer, which is released in 1991 from Impulse, a division of Zeppelin games. This is one of 2 football games from Zeppelin to carry the name of everybody's favourite Man United hating former player, manager and pundit. The game itself though is a really slow, jerky and unplayable mess. It's not even a technically impressive 3D game to have that going for it. I didn't feel like it was responding to any of the joystick commands that I made, and this one is also going to go down in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put it below Gary Lineker's Hot Shot. Next up, we have a game called Hot Ball, which is one that I had never actually heard of before putting this list together. This was released in 1998 from a developer called Satori, and this game just blows a simple concept, because what should be a simple one-on-one football game is utterly destroyed by its woeful rotational control system. I would really like to ask the makers of this game one simple question: how on earth are you meant to actually control your player if you can't see them on screen? If by some miracle you find yourself with the ball at your feet and you are able to shoot, even that's seemingly impossible. This is a game that's just awful in every single way, and this is going to go right down at the bottom of the rubbish category. Next up, we have I Play 3D Soccer, which was developed by Simulmondo in 1991. It's got lots of really interesting ideas to it, but none of them work very well. You can take control of a single player, meaning that you spend a lot of time just running around. And I do like the fact that you can hold down the fire button and press down on the joystick for your player to raise his arm to call for a pass. That was a neat touch. But one of the biggest problems that the game has is the control system itself, because tank controls in a football game? Were the developers mad? I mean, at least in this one you can see where 3D World Soccer began to take shape. So I am going to put it below that one, and I think I'm going to put it at the top of the poor category. Next up we have International Soccer from Zeppelin Games, released in 1993. This is a budget release with a pretty large number of teams but very few play options. It successfully manages to mimic the look and style of sensible soccer, but it actually forgets to be as playable. I actually got really annoyed with the number of times that one of my players would be stood right next to the ball and the game would refuse to give me control of that player. It just made me want to switch the game off. It's not terrible enough to go in the rubbish category though. I think I'm going to put this one in the poor, and I'm going to put it above Adidas Championship. Next up we have International Soccer Challenge, released in 1989 from Microstyle and developed by Red Rat Software. This is an interesting 3D football game, but unfortunately keeping the camera static when the view is so low down doesn't really work, as you can't see where the player that you're controlling is half the time. This actually means that getting the ball back off your opponent proves to be an absolute pain, as you don't know where you're coming from. Something as simple as a little on-screen indicator to tell you where your player is would have been nice. The game engine was recycled, however, for Wild Wheels, where it worked a lot better, and that game will be coming up later on. And I think I am going to stick this one at the bottom of the good category, below European Football Champ. Next up we have Italy 1990, developed and published by Codemasters. This is a blatant cash-in job, because obviously Codemasters couldn't let a major tournament go by without releasing a game to coincide with it, and of course it had to be as bad as this one. It's basically the dictionary definition of a lazy cash-in, and it doesn't even include all the teams. It does get bonus points for including a soccer skills mini-games mode that plays like an Olympics game, but that's the only thing that the game has going for it, and the only thing that stops it going in the rubbish category. I'm going to put this one in the poor, and I'm going to put it below England Championship Special. Next up we have Italy 1990 and Italy 1990 Winners Edition, both essentially the same game, released 6 months apart, not to be confused with the far better game on the Mega Drive of the same name. This was developed by Tiermaker, and all the movement and scrolling is really jerky, but the gameplay is surprisingly enjoyable, and there's very few play options other than single match or World Cup. But like I said, it's actually one that's actually worth playing, and I'm going to stick this one at the bottom of the good category, below International Soccer Challenge. Next up we have Italy 90 Soccer, which was actually released in 1988 from an Italian developer. This is what used to happen back in the Amiga days, where every time there was a major tournament you would get dozens of unofficially licensed games that would come out to try and capitalise. I should probably credit the Italian publisher here for the fact that they got this game out 2 years before the tournament. I will admit that I had more fun with this game than quite a lot of games on this list, but mainly because of how shoddy it all is. The fact that it's enjoyable keeps it out of the rubbish category, but only just, and I think I'm going to put this one above Gazza's Super Soccer. Next up we have John Barnes European Football, released in 1992, developed and published by Chrysalis. This is a really good looking and very playable game, especially if you got the CD32 version. An overall lack of options and teams compared to other similar games does hurt it a little bit, and had they left it at that, this game would be going probably up here, probably in the recommended. Unfortunately, John Barnes himself is actually wearing a Liverpool shirt on the title screen and on the box, so as a Manchester United fan, I simply cannot condone such a thing, considering that the game itself only has international teams that you can play as well. All they had to do was stick him in an England shirt, and then I would have put it all the way up here in the good category, but as it is, it's going to go right down here. Next up we have Kenny Dalglish Soccer Match, released in 1989, released by Impressions, and it's good old King Kenny, as people call him, although us Man United fans, that's only the last part of what we call him. Thankfully there's no such dilemma as the John Barnes game with this one, as this game is just plain awful. Everything is excruciatingly slow, and the scrolling doesn't even keep up with the ball, which just beggars belief. So this one is genuinely going to go in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put this one below Graham Souness Vector Soccer. Next up we have Kickoff, released in 1989, developed by Dino Dini and published by Anko. And this is a game that I played a lot when it first came out, even though By today's standards, it is pretty limited in its gameplay options, and there are only 8 international teams that you can play as and rename. The skill level option basically dictates the speed of the game, which does allow you to learn and get better. Like I said, when this game first came out, this was the go-to multiplayer game for me and my brother for the best part of the year. But considering what came after it, it's not really a game that I play today. So I am going to stick this one at the top of the good category. Next up, we have Kickoff 2, which came out the following year, 1990. Dino Dini basically improved everything. During my time working on both Games X and Amiga Action, this game was essentially how we spent our lunch breaks, just challenging each other to games on this one. The introduction of Aftertouch was an absolute game changer, not just for the Kickoff series, but for football games in general. I think by today's standards, this game hasn't aged particularly well, as the ball does ping around the pitch a little bit too much. And Goal did take what was here and improve on it even more. So I'm going to stick this one below Football Glory in the recommended category. Next up, we have Kickoff 3, which came out in 1994. Dino Dini, nowhere to be seen. This one was developed by Steve Screech, who actually did the graphics for Kickoff 2 and nothing more. Despite the change in view to a side-on one, the game actually does still feel like a Kickoff game, and it can actually be quite fun. However, it has a lot of bugs, for some reason doesn't support single button joysticks, and the computer AI isn't that great, making it really, really easy. Goal, otherwise known as the actual Kickoff 3, is much better than this one. I'm going to stick this one in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one above European Championship 92. Next game is Kickoff 3 European Challenge. Now normally I wouldn't include a enhanced version of a game, but this one is actually so much of an improvement over the actual Kickoff 3 that there's no way I couldn't include it. Everything about it is just far more polished. The game's got much better graphics overall. It also supports single button joysticks, 2-button joysticks and CD32 joypads. It's almost like they rush released the first one and then decided to finish it and release it again. So this one is actually going to go in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Football Champ. And then next up we have Kickoff 96, once again developed by Steve Screech and released in 1996 from the same publisher, Anko. This was the recipient of a pretty infamous 1% review from Amiga Power. Is it actually that bad? Probably not, but that doesn't mean that it's good either. It's definitely the worst game in the Kickoff series. It's quite tragic how far this series had fallen, and this one is almost completely unplayable. Only seems to respond to button presses every now and then when it feels like it. So this one is going to go in the right down in the rubbish category. But there are games in there that are worse. I think I'm going to put this one above Graham Souness Vector Soccer. Next up, we have Liverpool, the official game, released in 1992, published by Grand Slam and developed by Arc Developments. Do we actually need to talk about this one? I mean, come on, why am I having to pollute my 800 Mini with this? I'd really rather not, just move on to the next game, to be honest. Come on, why are you making me play this? If I wasn't being completely irrational, I'd be telling you that the 3D is smooth and that it plays quite well, but it's Liverpool. It's going next to John Barnes. Next up, we have Manchester United, the official computer game, developed and published by Chrysalis in 1990. It's an enjoyable, if unspectacular, side-on kickabout. For some reason, the shortest match that you can play is 10 minutes, and there doesn't seem to be any way to pause the game, which is a major oversight. The menu screens are well drawn, but the use of icons rather than text is annoying, as it quite regularly means that you'll pick the wrong option. It's a good starting point for the Manchester United series, this one, nothing more really. So this one's going to go in the good category, and I think I am going to put this one above Kickoff 3 European Champions. Next up, we have Manchester United Europe, which was released in 1990. And I remember this one spending the best part of a year inside the all formats top 20 sales charts, and let's face it, a game doesn't do that unless it's actually good. The graphics in this one are a vast improvement over the first game. Really excellent, with some great little animations bringing life to the players. I think this is quite possibly the best side-on football game on the Amiga. Is it good enough to go in the essential category though? I think not. I think I'm going to put this one at the top of the recommended category though, just above Football Glory. Next up we have Manchester United Premier League Champions, which came out in 1994. This actually allows you to play as any team from all 4 divisions, not just the Premier League. It's got fully customizable tournaments and leagues, and you can even tweak the formations. It's really fast and playable, and the computer opponents provide some pretty decent but not unbeatable opposition. However, I feel that they should have stuck with the Manchester United Europe template and not tried to chase sensible. Although it's enjoyable, it's also pretty forgettable. And I'm going to stick this one at the bottom of the recommended category, below Kickoff 2. Next up we have Manchester United The Double, which was the last Manchester United game released on the Amiga, released in 1995. The menu screens and options are pretty much identical to the Premier League Champions game that came out the year before. Once you get out on the pitch though, it is actually quite a bit different, as the view is now an isometric one rather than directly overhead, and that helps to give the game its own identity. I remember playing this one in a multiplayer custom league with up to 4 players and having a lot of fun with it. I'm going to stick this one in the recommended category as well, and I think I'm going to put this one above Kickoff 2. Next up we have Microprose Soccer, which came out in 1989, developed by Electronic Pencil and published by Microprose. This is a really disappointing conversion of the excellent Commodore 64 game that had been developed by Sensible Software. It's nowhere near as fluid and playable as the 8-bit version was. To its credit, it does go for arcade fun rather than realism. Just like Football Glory, the banana shots are definitely entertaining. It's also got the option to play indoor football, which makes it a little bit different as well. Unfortunately though, because of the quality of the conversion, I think I am going to stick this one right down at the bottom of the good category, below Italy 1990. Next we have Peter Beardsley's International Football, released in 1988, developed by Tech, who are actually the same people as Chrysalis. This is incredibly frustrating from a gameplay point of view, as you have a power bar for everything, yet you never seem to have time to actually build it up to a significant degree. Player selection is also abysmal, and I found that I was never controlling who I wanted to be controlling, which was especially problematic when I was defending. Giving partial control of the goalkeeper to the player also means that he's always out of position. The final nail in the coffin for this one is the fact that it has no sound effects whatsoever. Just a really poor rendition of "Here we go, here we go" that plays on a loop throughout the entire game and gets annoying really, really quickly. This one is going to go in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one just below England Championship Special. Next up we have Player Manager, which came out in 1990 from Anco, developed by Dino Dini. Now, I know I said I wasn't including management games in this one, but this one is much more of a player game than it is a manager game. It was released between the first 2 Kickoff games, so disappointingly it doesn't have the aftertouch that Kickoff 2 had. Everything that worked well about the first Kickoff game is present and correct though. The management side is pretty basic, but it is still pretty fun, and being able to play as a single player on the pitch offered something a little bit different as well. So I think this one is slightly better than the original Kickoff, meaning that I am going to put this one at the bottom of the recommended category. Next up we have the original Sensible Soccer, released in 1992 from Renegade, developed by Sensible Software. This is a shockingly easy game to pick up and play for just about anyone, which actually hides the huge amount of depth to the gameplay. I'm still scoring goals in this 30 years after I first played it that I never even thought were possible. This is the game that, when I got my A500 Mini, forced me to actually have to go out and buy the joystick, as you simply cannot play this one on a joypad, as it doesn't offer the freedom of control that I feel is necessary. Probably the biggest disappointment on this one is the lack of teams that it has in it, only really having international sides. But that doesn't stop it going in the essential category, and I am going to put this one below 5-a-side soccer. And the reason that I put this one so low is because the next game is Sensible World of Soccer, which came out in 1994 and has been re-released pretty much every year since. I mean, where do I start with this one? It improves everything from the first game, even the things about it that you didn't think needed to be improved. It introduced a pretty comprehensive management side, but not so much that it alienates the people who don't want to be playing Championship Manager. It's got so many teams and modes, including some excellent custom teams, and it even gets updated by the fans every season today. If this isn't my favourite game of all time, then it's definitely in the top 3. It just depends on what day you ask me. So nowhere this can go other than right at the top of the essential category. Next we have Sierra Soccer, which came out in 1994, developed by Dynamics. Sierra Online were probably the last publisher that you would have thought to make a football game. Graphically, it's not the best, as the players look terrible, but the gameplay is good, and which is the important bit, as it plays really fast and smooth. It has some really good free kicks and corners, but the tackling is actually pretty laughable, as players can seemingly turn corners while sliding. Once you do get used to the game though, you can score some pretty excellent goals, and the replay mode is really nice. I don't think it's quite good enough to go in the recommended category though, so I'm going to put this one in the good, and I'm going to put it above Emily and Hughes. Next up we have Soccer King, which came out in 1988 from Kingsoft. This is a shockingly poor release from German developers, with no options for leagues or cups, just single games. The players run around the pitch at a pretty decent pace, but the moment they get control of the ball, their speed seems to halve. The entire game, in fact, just seems to move painfully slow and looks terrible. There's simply no reason to play this one whatsoever. I'm going to put this one in the rubbish category, and I'm going to put it below Fighting Soccer. Next up we have Soccer Superstars, which came out in 1995 from Flare Software. And this is another typically low effort and low quality release from Flare. The only significant thing about this one at the time of release was the fact that it actually came with a free football. So if you thought about it, you got a football for 30 quid and a game for free. It's got the most comically inept goalkeepers in any game on this list. They seem to be completely incapable of dealing with anything that's kicked from a 45-degree angle, and you'll score every time. The only options that the game has are a single friendly match or a cup, and every time you start, the game will randomly select your opponent for you. All in all, pretty terrible, and so this one's going to go in the rubbish category, but there's games in there that are definitely worse. I'm going to put it above Gaza 2. Next up we have Striker, which came out in 1992 from Rage Software. This is probably one of the most played football games in my lifetime. But unfortunately the Amiga version isn't a patch on the Super Nintendo one, which is where I played it. It is a lot faster and smoother than pretty much every other 3D style game on this list, and it's pretty easy to pick up and play. Unfortunately though, it's very limited in its choice of play options, and you will probably find that you'll get bored of it pretty quickly. Not quite good enough to go in the recommended category though, and I think I'm going to put this one just below Kickoff at the top of the good. Next up we have Striker number 9, which came out in 1990 from Impressions, developed by Video Vulture. And this is a completely different game to every other game on this list. This has you take on the role of a single striker, putting yourself through all the training mini games in order to earn a place in the matchday squad. Fairly similar in style to Gremlin's Footballer of the Year, but much less of a management game than those were. The training segments themselves are a little bit like a rubbish version of the loading screens off a modern day FIFA game, crossed with a multi-event athletics game. But it all looks and plays pretty basic and is not really worth your time, so I'm going to stick this one in the rubbish category, and I'm going to put it above Gaza 2 as well. Next up we have Total Football, which came out in 1996 from Domark. I had a few issues trying to get the controllers to work properly with this one, but it is definitely worth doing so. It's a much more successful isometric game than FIFA, as it plays much faster and smoother than the Amiga version of that ever did. It can be a little bit difficult to see which player that you're controlling at times, but not enough to get in the way of how much fun the game is overall. It reminded me very much of the early ISS games on consoles, which is probably one of the strongest compliments that I can give it. I am going to stick this one in the essential category, and I think I'm going to put it below the original Sensible Soccer. Next up, we have Wembley International Soccer, which is basically a more refined and polished follow-up to European Champions. The excellent passing system from European Champions is once again present and correct, and it's well worth the effort to learn. Being able to switch between the overhead view and side-on view at any times is still here as well, and it's just as excellent as it always was, and the gameplay is just as well. It's occasionally the on-screen displays can obscure what you want to be looking at, but not to a degree that it spoils your enjoyment. It fully supports all the buttons of a CD32 joypad as well on the A1200 version, which is a definite bonus. And I think I am going to stick this one at the top of the recommended category. Next up, we have Wild Cup Soccer, which came out in 1994 from Tech Software, published by Millennium. And basically, what the publisher thought here was, we had lots of success with brutal sports football. Why don't we try that again with soccer? Great idea in principle, and you probably will have fun for the first couple of matches that you play here, as it can be quite amusing, especially in two-player mode. Get past those initial first couple of games though, and you're left with a pretty awful and extremely tedious game with no actual depth. Movement is far too jerky to be able to see what's going on half the time, which is a shame, as the graphics themselves are actually quite nice when they're static. But this one's going to go in the rubbish category, and I think I am going to put this one above England Championship Special. Next up, we have Wild Wheels, released in 1991, published by Ocean Software and developed by Red Rat Software. This uses the same graphics engine as International Soccer Challenge, but it works a lot better here. This is football with cars, 24 years before Rocket League was a thing, and actually quite entertaining as well. The choice of two different control methods offers different levels of difficulty, but both are actually quite enjoyable. It's hurt by being single player only though. Back in the day, it did allow you to link two Amigas together, which would have been a great way to play it if that was still possible on the A500 Mini, but sadly it's not. And that's what stops it being much higher than it's going to go. And I think I'm going to put this one in the good category, probably just above the original Manchester United game. Next, we come to World Championship Soccer, released in 1990 from Elite, and this is actually a fairly accurate conversion of the Sega arcade game. Unfortunately, that arcade game was pretty forgettable in the first place. This is really frustrating to play, as your passes always seem to come up short from their intended destination, and your players always slow down whenever they have the ball. It also plays a lot slower than the arcade original and the much better Mega Drive version. So unfortunately, I am going to stick this one in the poor category. But there's a lot of games in there that are worse than this, so I'm going to put it just above Amiga Soccer. Next up, we have World Cup 90 from an Italian developer, Didari Brothers, same people who made the Italy 90 game that came out in 1988. This is one of those rare games that's so naff that the naffness actually makes it really fun to play. Your opponents will try overhead kicks at every available opportunity and take corners when nobody is waiting for them. The ball pings around the pitch far faster than any of the players on the pitch can run. Everything about it makes it feel like a game, which is probably why I found it far more enjoyable than a lot of titles on this list. It is pretty terrible though, so I can't put it above the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Amiga Soccer as well. Next up, we have World Cup Soccer Star, released in 1994 from BUB Software, and this is a really shockingly poor game that looks like it came out in the early days of the Amiga, but actually came out the same year as Sensible World of Soccer. Yes, that's hard to believe, isn't it? It's truly horrendous to look at, with a completely unresponsive controls, and it even forces you to wait 5 minutes before you can even play it, while it generates all the teams and players. This is just awful in every conceivable way, and I think this is easily the worst game out of all the ones that I've discussed so far. Next up, we have World Cup Soccer Italia 90, known as World Trophy Soccer in some countries, and also released for the Arcadia system. This was published by Virgin and developed by Novatrade. It's really nicely presented, with some good player sprites and some nicely animated referee inserts as well. The gameplay is a little bit lacking though, although I did get some fun out of it. The way that the viewpoint changes whenever you get in range to take a shot is disorientating at first, but does actually work quite well, especially when it gives you control of the goalkeeper. So I think I'm going to put this one in the good category, and I think I'm going to put it above the first Manchester United gear. And we finally come to World Cup USA 94, released by US Gold and developed by Tiertex, a typically lazy rush job of the kind that gave Tiertex a bad name. More effort seems to have gone into the menu screens and presentation than the actual game itself. It's not as bad as some of the games on this list, and it does actually play better than the Italia 90 game that came out from the same developers. But there are so many areas where the game is lacking that there's nowhere I can put this one other than the rubbish. And I think I'm going to put this one below Kickoff 3. So there you have it. That's 58 football games on the Amiga, all ranked. Maybe you will disagree with some of the placements that I have here. If you do, then please let me know in the comments. Maybe you don't have an irrational of football teams from Liverpool like I do, and you would place those games higher. Maybe you would be completely irrational against the Man United games. Who knows? If you've enjoyed this video, please do give us a like and subscribe. I'm now going to be making one Retro Game Super League video a month, as they do take a lot longer to make than I had initially anticipated. But don't forget to check out the best 10 videos that I have coming out that have replaced the other one. So I hope, once again, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you come back next month for the next one. If there's a category that you want me to cover, please do make your suggestions in the comments as well. Until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.